All right, shall we kick things off?
Yep, let's get going.
Well, hello and welcome everyone. You have reached the Leveraging OKRs as a Catalyst for Transformation webinar. So if you're looking for cat videos on YouTube, you've made a serious wrong turn somewhere. My name is David Walton. I'm an Agile Engagement Manager here at Icon Agility Services, and we're very excited to have you join us today. Today we'll be hearing from the thought leaders behind scaled OKRs, namely Larry LaSalle and Colin O'Neill. During this webinar, we're going to focus on 4 key areas that enable OKRs as a catalyst for transformation. Those being outcomes thinking, outcomes planning, outcomes execution, and of course, measuring those outcomes once you've done those things. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're going to do today. I'm going to give you a little bit of a history about Icon. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then we're going to have about a 45-minute presentation followed by a 15-minute Q&A. Please use the Q&A function inside of Zoom, and we'll do our best to curate and answer those questions live at the end. This session is being recorded, and everyone that registered today will get a recording of this presentation along with the deck that we're using. So as Scaled OKR's first delivery partner, Icon brings a lot of end-to-end expertise for a complete enterprise-wide OKR solution, including assessments, coaching, workshops, and certification. But that's not all we do. As some of you may know, we've been in the SAFe game for a long time. We were one of Scaled Agile's first partners ever to sign up back in the early days of Agile. A little bit about our company. We trained over 13,000 people over the last 10 years. We have a core team of about 60 SPCs. These are the journeyman teachers of the world that help companies adopt scaled Agile, lean Agile mindset and thinking in their organizations. We're also very proud to have 5 SPCTs. Now, if you don't know what an SPCT is, think of those folks as like the Yodas of the scaled Agile world. There's only, I think, about 65 or so of those in the world. So that's a very rarefied breed. And we also are very happy to have 2 SAFe fellows inside of our organization. Regarding SAFe fellows, I believe that number is in the teens. So we have a very strong core group of thought leaders that we use for our consulting practices. So it gives you a little bit of the pedigree from where we came from. So as I mentioned before, our expertise doesn't just lend itself to OKRs and executive and portfolio in general. We also teach the entire universe of all the SAFe classes and workshops, specializing in things like lean portfolio management, DevSecOps, executive coaching, adaptive leadership coaching, and everything that helps kind of make the engine move forward. We have led SAFe implementations for over 100 different companies, and some amazing thought leadership has come out of Icon. So I don't know if some of you may be aware, but we helped develop the SAFe DevOps course itself that Scaled Agile purchased the IP and turned into their course. Scaled OKRs also came out of the brainchild of some of our consultants, but you can hear more about that in a minute. So whether you're just starting out and you're not sure what questions to ask, or you've adopted and refined some of your Agile processes for years and are looking for what's next, we can certainly help with that. So now a little bit about Colin and Larry. Larry has been a top consultant in the OKR executive portfolio space for years. And Colin used to be the CEO of this little company called Scaled Agile, which some of you may have heard about. So both of them have been working at the top levels of organizations for years, helping organizations gain alignment in their business goals and deliver business value faster. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to these guys and start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dalen. Thank you for the introduction. No need for us to go back through introducing ourselves. It's worth mentioning, in addition to being the CEO of Scaled Agile, Colin was also the co-founder of Scaled Agile as well. So definitely bring some Agile chops to the game here. We joined forces, Colin and I, in 2019 on the OKRs front, mostly because we, at the time, recognized the strong synergies between what you can accomplish with OKRs in addition to what you can do from Agile. And as the understanding deepens, we start to recognize that you can do a lot with OKRs on their own. And, so you start to look at, what's that market look like? Where is there opportunities? And one thing led to another, and we ended up partnering on scaled OKRs. So the topic today we're going to talk about is this idea of OKRs as a catalyst for transformation. And I personally love this topic a lot because typically when we're talking about transformation these days, we're talking about it in terms of Agile, okay? And when we talk about OKRs, we're typically talking about goal setting. If we're lucky, we can raise the conversation of OKRs up to talking about strategy. We can go even further and say, we want to talk about organizational alignment by way of OKRs. Now we're going to take it to the next level and say, what would an OKRs transformation look like? Or how can we leverage OKRs to do more from a transformation perspective? So the perspective that we're going to use to guide today's conversation is this idea of using OKRs as a complement to a transformation, but also as a way to help move a transformation along that may have plateaued. Or it may be a transformation that could be going relatively smoothly, but we're not seeing the business impact that we expected. We could be getting really good at SAFe or really good at Agile, but we're not necessarily being able to demonstrate a performance impact or a measurable growth impact as it relates to this change. And that's what we're after, right? And so to get started with this conversation, we really kind of need to talk about what leads a transformation to get to a place where it plateaus or stalls or doesn't get the benefits that we anticipate. So Colin, maybe you could talk through, in your experience, some of the things that you've come familiar with as it relates to things that impact transformation.
Yeah, sure, Larry. So we've experienced a number of transformations that start off with a big bang and lots of enthusiasm, but ultimately kind of peter out, and we're not really sure why. But Larry and I have done some research on this, and we've come up with a set of reasons why transformations typically stall. It kind of starts with the terminology we use and how we show up. We're mostly from the Agile community here, and the language we use just doesn't resonate with our business folks. They're looking for something that in a language that they're familiar with, and they don't really understand Agile. I mean, we've all experienced so many times leaders say, I don't even know what you're talking about, or when we start talking about Agile, their eyes glaze over. So that's one reason, is that we just can't seem to penetrate that ceiling that gets us to a point in the organization where we can really make effective change. Another is that the way strategy is developed in most organizations is that initiatives are funded on an annual basis. And the strategy seems to be in terms of only initiatives, which doesn't really necessarily hold a comprehensive holistic strategy. And it's just a bunch of things that we're doing, and we're not really sure how they all tie together. So that sets up an impedance mismatch, really, when we don't have the necessary language to understand what our strategy really is. And it also leads, as many of us know, to very high work in process, very high WIP, because the priorities are unclear and people think this is a good idea to do that. And so the work gets pushed down to the lower levels and everybody is swamped. So an Agile transformation by itself, it typically does not have the broad influence necessary to transform an enterprise.
Good. Thanks, Colin. I wanted to add one thing onto that, which is 5 years ago, when an organization called upon us to help with transformation, you go in and it's brand new, right? You are literally introducing concepts to an organization, for the first time, and you're educating them. And there's all kinds of things going on. But now, more and more, we're getting pulled into or asked to come in and help organizations where the ship has sailed, right? We're now down the path, and we need help, right? And so, so helping to solve that problem, this in-flight transformation or transformation that's not moving, it's like, you can't just continue to try and use the same tool over and over and over again, right? So as Colin and I think through, like, how do we help these organizations, we kind of have to bring a fresh perspective and a fresh set of eyes. And so when we start to, kind of boil things down in order to be able to examine them closely, we landed on what you're looking at here, which is these fundamental capabilities organizations need to be good at in order to produce a single thing of value of any kind. So the pattern we came up with is just think, plan, execute, measure. We have to fundamentally be able to think about what it is we're trying to do, strategize. We need to be able to come up with a plan that our organization is capable of executing. We then need to execute it, and then we need to measure so that we can, make the adjustments. The measuring informs the adjustments we make in order to kind of continue this process of moving. So we look at this and we're like, if we can look at these fundamental things that organizations need to be good at, maybe we can start to identify where things are breaking apart. So this view right here, it's helpful, but it really is just kind of a modified PDCA, but it's still a very viable way of analyzing an organization. We just append this ideation and strategy step in the front end of it because we know that strategic clarity is the missing link in many cases in order for an organization to start asking the questions of, are we working on the right things? Or if we want to demonstrate business value moving through our system, we first want to make sure that we're moving the right work through and that it aligns strategically. So concentrating on this view of things was really helpful because when Colin and I took the conversation further, I'm going to let Colin speak to this in just a second, what we started to recognize is you can actually have different modalities within each of these areas that happen to be in conflict with one another, but they're critical touch points between them. So Colin, expand on what we mean here when we talk about these critical touch points and these modalities and how OKRs start to provide a solution in this space.
Sure. Yeah. So it really goes to the notion that strategy should drive execution, not the other way around. If we're really going to create value for an organization, leadership has to think about what value means to the company for the near term, midterm, and long term. Well, as Larry said, this has to do with the 4 different capabilities or modalities that are involved in ultimately creating value for an organization. And each of these has different types of people with different skills and different mindsets. And so it's at the intersection of these modalities that communication breaks down. Now, for example, the people that develop strategy, once they're done with that, they hand it off to the people that do the planning. And there's not a whole lot of follow through to make sure that the plans ultimately reflect the strategy because there's a missing common language. And we've already mentioned that not only is there a missing common language between Agile and business, but also between these modalities. So what we're trying to do is create a language that can be used across all 4 of these capabilities. So OKRs provide that common language, and they're very unique constructs. OKRs, they're actually a brilliant technique that was developed by Andy Grove of Intel back in the 70s and 80s. And they're brilliant because they represent two sides of the same coin. The one side is strategy related, and it's expressed in aspirational, ethereal objectives. The other side of the coin, which are the key results that drive execution and measurement, they're very down to earth and specific. So we get this nice yin-yang balance that provides the overarching goal plus the mechanisms by which to measure, are we actually moving in that direction? And if you use a hypothesis statement in your OKRs, which we do recommend, essentially you are describing the experiments that you're going to set up to achieve the objectives via those key results. So basically the thread between all of these is what we call the OKR steel thread, and it ties them together. It ties the four modalities so that they have a common language across them, and we get a complete feedback loop. After the measure, we can see, did we actually achieve the strategy that we hoped through our planning and through our execution? So solving the translation at these touch points provides a very stable environment for successful and broader transformations.
I'm going to give an example, Colin, that I think will help. So if you think about an organization, whether they're rock solid at developing strategy or not, it's, we're talking about each of these modalities on here being its unique thing. So here's an example. If I cast a strategy for the organization, let's just say I do a really good job at that. But then when I plan, if my plan is a carryover year over year, 12-month kind of list of initiatives, and we don't take the time to reconcile whether those initiatives strategically align, that's the breakdown of the critical touch point. That's what leads to an organization exceeding its own capacity, because it doesn't have an operationalized capability to challenge the work it has to do. This is why you hear people say, our organization just doesn't know how to say no. We don't have the organizational discipline to be able to know what we need to focus on. And it's because our strategy is formed in one silo, and then the way our work is actually moved and approved and we build that annual list is done in a completely different silo, devoid of the strategic thinking that has to go into this. Okay. Similarly, like where you see other kinds of breakdowns is when you're executing in an agile way, but you've got traditional project management oversight that's happening at the planning layer. So now your planning layer is resulting in more or less traditional like work breakdown, fixed scope, fixed time, fixed scope, fixed time, fixed resources on out of the planning, and then the execution is trying to do some incremental delivery of value every couple of weeks. So they've just got these conflicting modalities. And so when you think and you capture your OKRs in terms of you capture your strategy in terms of OKRs, that becomes an input to planning. The first thing the planning does is they don't start to create work in response to this input of an OKR that came from a higher level. They now craft their OKR to determine how do we connect. So we first establish these connections by way of OKRs. That's the idea here. And it all helps us to, Colin, if you want to speak to this one.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. So we recommend using both OKRs and Agile in transformation. So generally speaking, Agile delivery has become very effective at delivering quality products quickly. I mean, the beauty of SAFe is that it really fine-tunes the engine behind delivery. But often we're not really sure that what we're delivering is ultimately serving the organization. And so we operate under a presumption in Agile and SAFe that that a good strategy exists, that we have to have that presumption because we're not really connected with that strategy part of the capability. Now, many of you have probably seen this pattern. It's probably why you're here in this webinar. I know for myself and maybe for many of you, it just feels like something is missing in Agile. And what's missing is this validated business strategy that we can count on to drive the work that we do. So let's look at this heat map along this IPDCA continuum. And again, I is the ideation of strategy. The P is the plan. The C is the what's what's the ID? The plan, do, no.
Check and adjust.
Yeah, check and adjust, right. So along this continuum, you notice that OKRs are really good at the thinking part and pretty good at the planning part, and are really solid in the measuring part because of the nature of OKRs and the various types of key results, the leading, lagging, and balancing indicators. So basically, they're really good mechanism to for the strategy and planning over long periods of time. Now, the Agile, on the other hand, is really good, and specifically SAFe is really good at the execution and in the planning areas and measuring the day-to-day delivery of value, but not necessarily tying everything up at the end to say, yeah, we've actually achieved our what we originally accomplished. So when combined, we believe that OKRs and Agile complement one another and provide complete coverage across the IPDCA spectrum.
So where we're going to take the conversation from here is we're going to start to look at specifically what we can do from an OKRs perspective within each of those touch points across that think, plan, execute, and measure. So we're going to look at each one of those. But we also want to continue to talk about this idea of the transformative nature of OKRs as well. So the starting place here, if you introduce OKRs into a transformation as part of the plan, the first place is to start reevaluating the goals we have set for transformation. If you look at typical Agile transformation goals, things like faster time to market, improved collaboration, or more predictability, increased predictability, there's a theme that those types of goals seem to have kind of assumed into them, because they make it, they're basically assuming that the entirety of our entire organization, our full system of delivery by way of Agile transformation, can become more predictable, or can actually get value to the customer more quickly. And that's not necessarily the case. And so what we want to do is start to readdress the goals. So for example, what you're looking at on this slide is the types of goals that would start to affect the work that's moving incrementally through the organization. So for example, defining outcomes before initiatives, super important. This needs to be a goal. This needs to be to say how, through by way of transformation, how do we operationalize for our organization the ability for us to set the outcomes we're striving for before we start defining all of the initiatives. This is a jumping off point. This actually creates, this particular one actually is a big anti-pattern for OKRs. What we see when organizations are trying to develop their OKRs, if they've already got all the initiatives defined, then their OKRs start to look like the tasks they need to do to deliver these in-flight initiatives. But it doesn't necessarily challenge whether or not the initiative is strategically aligned or anything like that. It just starts to immediately define our dates and milestones. So the OKR as a container becomes just a modified project plan of dates and milestones. And that's a bad thing, because we're defining the outcome after the initiative's already flight. We already said what we're going to do, and now we're going to define what we're going to accomplish. So it's important. We need to be able to express a strategy that's both aspirational and measurable. We're gonna look at some example strategies in a bit where you'll relate to them too, because they're very common. But we need a strategy that's measurable, so we can then pass that along to the rest of the organization to actually pick up the challenge that we presented to the organization and move the needle forward. We need to get good at having data-informed strategies. That's the measure element of this. And we need to be able to ensure our initiatives are connected and complementary to specific OKRs. When you have OKRs in the picture, you'll see some very interesting conversations start to happen in the organization that don't happen otherwise, which is, being able to, ensure that initiatives are actually strategically aligned. So we've got a lot to cover. I'm going to keep moving here. This is just one quick point, because we're going to get to this strategy and planning connection here in just a second. But we want to reinforce the importance of why we're having that discussion about strategy. And what you're looking at here is the output of a survey that was done by MIT Sloan in 2018. Effectively, what they found was that when top-level executives in an organization were asked to name the top 3 strategies of the organization, only 51% of them could actually successfully do that, name the top 3 strategies of the organization. By the time you get down to like the frontline leads, supervisor, managers, tech leads, et cetera, that number, you can see what the number drops down to. So we also hear of low engagement numbers in organizations and people not understanding who the customers are, so this is a decay rate in understanding. And it's at the heart of why strategy is so important. So we're going to talk about that now. So this would be, so when we talk about connecting thinking to planning, right? This kind of describes a holistic interaction and interconnectivity of strategic understanding, because these are all representing levels of OKRs is what this is meant to describe. So you have company level OKRs that then influence and are an input to line of business OKRs that become an input to kind of the next level down, et cetera, et cetera. But the key to this, the key to making this work is having top level OKRs. That's the piece that is so important. Now, top level doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be this, like company level and line of business level. It could be this. And in very, very large enterprises, this is the more common place to start, because the line of business has been given a degree of autonomy by the organization itself to drive strategy. Now this still might be true at some level, but when this is true, this works as well. The key here, though, to get started with OKRs is that we want to have 2 levels. We want to have a strategic expression of what we're trying to accomplish and a tactical expression of the things that we're trying to do to actually move the needle for the higher level strategy. So 2 levels are needed. If you're a smaller organization, okay, where the leadership of the organization is more involved in the tactical day-to-day stuff that's happening, you might be able to get away with just the higher level OKRs. But in most cases, we find that 2 levels is sufficient to get started, and honestly done right, and we're going to look at this in a bit, 2 levels may be all you would ever need. Okay, so Colin, if you want to talk a little bit about these types of strategies that we see.
Yeah, sure. So many companies we know, they struggle with effectively articulating, communicating their strategy. Even with the best intentions, basically strategy is often spoken in a series of funded initiatives like Larry was just talking about. And what we really need, though, is we need a set of clear goals with measurable business outcomes. So well-crafted OKRs essentially jumpstart transformations by providing them in unambiguous language and in a consistent format. I'll give you an example about moving away from vague goals to measurable strategy. I worked with a client a few years ago that was using strategic themes to express corporate strategy. And the one strategic theme that I'm going to reference here was called "Win with Food." Now, that was all we had, was "win with food." Now, we didn't know, nobody knew what that meant. And so there was a lot of confusion about that. But what we ultimately discovered was what the board really wanted to do was, because this company was in the retail grocery space, they wanted to diversify and explore new markets that leveraged their core capabilities, which were food acquisition and the distribution systems. So one strategy was to move into the restaurant business and thus win with food. And that was set up as a 2-year experiment to see if that was going to be a profitable move or not. But once the goal was clearly articulated with the desired outcomes and a strategy for doing that, it could be acted upon by the various business units that together could help achieve that objective. So referencing a previous slide, OKRs help us build the right thing, and Agile helps us build the thing right. Now, we recommend using planning horizons to inform strategy. This is borrowed from McKinsey's 3 horizons model. We added a 4th horizon, which is Horizon 0, and represents the quarterly cadence. Now, objectives and key results reflect the time box within which they're written. And essentially, we recommend 2 to 3 OKRs per horizon for whatever level of the organization you're at. Here's another example of this, how this effectively works is when Google was young, they started they had an objective, which was to be able to search across many emails. And so they came up with this notion and ultimately became Gmail, but it was a Horizon 2 goal, in other words, 2 to 3 years out, to leverage Google's search engine capabilities to search large number of emails that people were struggling with in other, Hotmail and some other tools. So they tried an experiment across this Horizon 2, and not everybody thought that it would work, but ultimately, of course, we know the history of Gmail. So it's important to set objectives for all your horizons at whatever level of the organization you're at, so that the organization and your people know where you're going. Now, we also want to make sure that we limit our work in process, or we limit the things that we focus on. So if everything's a priority, ultimately nothing's a priority. We've all experienced this. It's so poignant in so many organizations. And so top level goals, they must be significant with a clear focus. And there should only be a few of them. We all know that less is more. That's true. And it's really hard to say no to a lot of folks, but we have to get in the discipline of saying no more and saying yes less. Now remember that OKRs, when done properly, are works in progress. They're not static, set it and forget it, etched in stone. So it's important to remember that that we can choose from many areas of focus, but only pick 2 or 3 for whatever planning horizon you're working on. Now, I'll give you another example of this. Intuit, the company that had TurboTax, QuickBooks, Quicken, etc. Excuse me, I'm gonna drink of water here. In 2013, they had several goals that they set. These were Horizon 2 goals. They basically, in 2 to 3 years, they wanted to move from desktop-based software to cloud-based. They wanted to move from a closed platform to an open platform so people could develop third-party apps. and they wanted to move from a North American company to a global company. So they set these Horizon 2 objectives and ultimately accomplish them over that time. Now that's visionary, right? We need stuff that says, here's where the organization is going over time. And that allows us to mobilize our resources and actually move the needle in that direction. Now, they also had a Horizon 3 OKR, which was their long-term strategy to move from a set of different brands to an integrated ecosystem. So ultimately, they took those tools and over a period of 3 years, were able to blend them all together into that ecosystem. So these are just examples of why it's important to focus on the things that really matter and not get distracted by every little shiny bauble that comes along, thus diluting the the effectiveness of the organization.
Cool. Let's start talking about now moving into this planning portion here. So we talked about kind of the influence that clear strategy has on the ability to start to define outcomes for the organization and different and other things as well. But once they're measurable and strategically aligned, we have a big benefit there. Now, planning with OKRs, the big change here is the ability to take as an input an OKR as opposed to a set of requirements. Like a lot of times we establish, that kind of what we're going to do, what initiative we're going to do by really drilling into the specifics of what we're trying to do. And we know from an Agile perspective, they try and talk us out of that. Don't get overly specific, but that's the tendency, right? When we talk about outcomes planning, we're talking about defining the outcome before what it is we're going to do. So you need to be able to take an input of an OKR and have an OKR be the first thing you produce, and then you start to define what it is you're going to do. So that's one element to it. Another element of outcomes planning is this vertical and horizontal alignment. So let's say, for example, we had a company objective, to launch into a new market, for example. So to do that, we need, salespeople to do something. We need marketing people to do something. We need technical people to do something. We need our operations folks or our care center, they need to do something. So when we are able to have this container called an OKR that outlines our objectives that we're trying to achieve, and that becomes a common language in the organization, it makes it possible for us to easily, in quotes a little bit, more easily have this vertical and horizontal conversations, because we're not up, we're not up against competing priorities now, right? We're trying to minimize the competing priorities. We're trying to move the organization, the entirety of the organization, if you will, or a line of business, kind of moving them in sync by setting a common goal for them all to hit. So if we're working toward the same goal, and I'm on the IT side, and I need to, collaborate with marketing or sales or something that they're going to do so that our goals are aligned, we now have a common set of priorities that we can do that around with using OKRs as that container. Now, when we're talking about this planning to execution piece, which is really what we're trying to get to. So we talked about expressing strategy in an OKR, using OKRs as a planning mechanism to inform our decisions around what we're going to do. It really leads to this system that you're looking at here. So over here on the left side, this is the OKR side of the equation. And on the right side, this is the execution side of the equation. But it's important to understand how they all align and work together. So for example, if we had a company objective to increase recurring revenues, and it had a key result of reach monthly recurring revenue of $250,000, so that's what that is, right? Now the line of business can come in and say, oh, we're trying to increase revenue. We got a target number we're trying to get to, specifically around recurring revenue. And so what are things that we can do that would deliver against that? Let's start with our OKRs. What are things we can do? Well, we can offer a free trial period, or we can expand into a Southeast region. Okay, so If we follow that one, okay, so market expansion, that's what we're trying to do, increase revenue. Let's expand markets. How will we do that? Well, or how will we know when we've achieved that? Well, we'll know when we can obtain 1,000 new customers. That's a key result, a measurable key result. And we'll know when we're getting this 10,000 visits from this new market. We'll know that we're affecting the market. So now we've got 2 levels of clear strategy. And now we can leverage what we know from an Agile perspective and start to define our hypothesis-driven experiments that we are going to call epics, right? Where we're packaging up what is it that we're actually going to build that's going to affect the marketplace. And we can link that back up to its key result. So this key result, we're going to do an experiment of a referral program on this epic. This epic's leading indicator, if you will, is going to be that we get 250 new customers. We'll do a second experiment of bundling with Apple Music. We'll do that work. We'll evaluate the outcome. We'll use the data to determine which work we should continue on and which work we should stop. So when you hear about the idea of connecting strategy to execution, one, don't leave out the planning piece, because that's an important connection to the, it's an important component to that connection. But when you talk about that connection, it's possible to make it an explicit connection. You could literally have metadata on an epic artifact that shows what its parent OKR is. And that's the type of organizational clarity that we're trying to reach. Now, for those of you that are working with SAFe, you have a number of touch points that you could take advantage of to integrate the use of OKRs into your day-to-day operations to help reinforce that strategic clarity. This is another way for you to do that. They could be part of your product strategy. If you're a strong product organization, then you could use OKRs for your product vision, if you will. You can use them to as input to your PI planning, and they can become reflected in PI objectives. We should see our OKRs and our PI objectives. Okay, there's some synergies there. They're solving the same problems, or they're pursuing the same outcomes. So you have, and then the quarterly OKR cycle, which is the pretty standard way of doing it, 3 months at a time, very much complements the PI cadence of delivery. So there's lots of opportunities to do that. So while we're talking about the OKR cycle, Colin, you want to talk a little bit about that cycle in terms of connecting? Let me summarize though real quick. So that was talking about planning to execution. And that, by the way, let me go back here. This is called a business value delivery model. It's something that we came up with in out of scaled OKRs. And so that's what this is called. And now we want to talk about connecting execution to measurement.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. So we are a little bit behind in time. We do want to obviously have some time for questions, but so I'll try to pick up the pace here a little bit, but without diluting the message. So this the OKR cycle connects the execution to the measurement. It's basically we have a 5-step cycle. You can use your own, but it's designed to keep objectives top of mind. So essentially, we're focused on outcomes versus outputs. And this provides the structure for the quarterly cycle that we're mostly familiar with. So with high-level context, we create OKRs, we co-create OKRs at the local level. And when using Agile and SAFe, we accomplish steps 3, 4, and 5 through through our action, the ceremony, the standard ceremonies that act as the action plans, the check-ins, and the review retrospective. And if we're not using Agile, we just make sure that we go through these steps with whatever works in our current culture. Now remember that measurement happens on an ongoing basis, and it's in near real time, and also at the end of the cycle. So the data feedback is really needed to make the decisions on what to stop, what to start, and what to continue developing on. So, and also to Larry's point earlier, in the business value delivery model, this is where the OKR cycle is where we run our experiments to determine which things we want, are adding value and which are not. And we also recommend essentially you got to manage this thing through governance. So we want to make sure that OKRs are being used effectively and consistently across an organization. And so we recommend instantiating what we call an OKRs practice. Now the OKRs practice it would be something like a LACE, a Lean Agile Center of Excellence. In this case, it provides integrated coaching, training, tooling, and standards for the organization, so that we strive to institutionalize the vertical and horizontal alignment through this holistic approach and make sure that teams are working together. This is a sample OKR practice canvas that you can use to jumpstart that, or you can use your own.
And even if you're not going to actually stand up, I like to describe that OKR practice as the nucleus that kind of holds the whole purpose of OKRs for our organization. It holds it together. But even if that wasn't the approach you were going to take, if you research OKRs, or if you've already researched OKRs, you'll hear again and again, the jumping off point is to define the why for yourself of why you're even going to try to use OKRs. Like what problem are you trying to solve for? It's an important step. Otherwise, you end up crafting some, OKRs that aren't really that effective. So if you're not going to use a practice, still consider using the canvas, because it'll bring you through the thought process of figuring out the why. Now, Colin and I are super keen on change management, right? So we know that this kind of change of any kind of change of magnitude, it requires a plan, right? We have to approach this thing mindfully and carefully. There's a human element to it. There's a business element to it. There's all kinds of factors to consider. Plus, there's just the change is hard in general fact that we know, right? So when we are talking about standing up OKRs in the organization, we're talking about identifying the team of people who's going to help drive it, who's going to help to provide the resources to the organization for them to even understand how to incorporate OKRs into the day-to-day work. And then you want to have a communication plan, you want to be able to train, and then you want to launch into that cycle, and then you want to continue to do that. If you're going to get into a more complex implementation of an OKRs practice or an outcomes office or something like that, we have a more refined and rigorous plan to follow as well. So the point in each one of them is we want to have a path to know what success looks like when we are setting out to do something like this. So let's see here.
Yeah, I'm gonna wrap it up here with a couple more slides, and then we'll get to the Q&A. Thanks, Larry. So just to kind of summarize where we've been, the OKR Steel Thread, it's a really powerful tool to bring all the necessary capabilities or modalities together for the common good of the organization. And it brings the OKRs and the Steel Thread brings business and leadership to the table without forcing them to talk in agile terms. We just talk in terms of strategy and outcomes. And one of the benefits of OKRs is it gives us permission to challenge the ever-increasing amount of work in process that we're asked to perform, whether and causes us to say no to anything that is not in line with our strategy and our goals. So people often think that OKRs are best used to improve their internal processes, but that couldn't be farther from the truth. OKRs are all about, and this is very important, OKRs are all about moving the needle on operation performance and making a difference toward company growth and advancement in one or more focus areas. So they're very operational oriented, and they are truly business objectives. So using the Steel Thread helps us overcome some of those transformational challenges that we previously discussed in terms of the critical touch points. Now, we have put together, because of the nature of the beast here, we put together 4 solution sets. So the Skilled OKR Business System is what we call it. And basically there are sets of solutions for each of these areas, the comprehensive areas. And oftentimes companies are, they have their own strengths and weaknesses. So some areas they're strong and some areas they're weak. So we want to give them the opportunity to focus in on the areas that they're weak in. So we've created these solution sets. So the scaled OKR business system ultimately is designed to transform organizations with minimal disruption using that steel-threaded system of delivery across different modalities. And that pretty much wraps up our presentation. Dale?
So actually, before I pass back to Dale, and thank you, Colin, thank you everyone for your time today. I did want to mention, if you're interested in learning more about OKRs, we have a class coming up actually next Thursday and Friday. It's a scaled OKR certified coach course. Krista's going to drop a link in the chat that you can look, and you could take a look at that. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Dalen. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Larry and Colin, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. So really quick on this one slide, how can we help? Give us a call, and you can talk to these folks live and talk about your business challenges and how we can leverage some of the support to help your organization move the needle in terms of alignment and business delivery. So our first question, actually, Greg's been very busy in the chat. We got a lot of questions from Greg, so I think one of these is going to be a twofer. But the first one, he said, is they found some success in his organization reframing and rebranding KPIs and metrics as indicators in order to help change that mindset from static to dynamic steering. Is this something you guys have seen, and do you have any suggestions and guidance on how to bridge that gap and message that?
Yeah, so KPIs measure daily operational performance, and they're good indicators to show where, how the organization is doing on a regular basis, but they're not transformative. OKRs are meant to be transformative. They're transformative by nature, and we don't use OKRs to, for our business as usual stuff. We use OKRs to move the organization forward, and through growth and other areas that are important to the company. So there's a very there's a very good distinction between OKRs and KPIs. Now, KPIs can also be used to inform OKRs. So they have their own value, and they're very good at understanding the operational status on a regular basis. But they can be used in terms of helping us get better clarity around our transformational initiatives.
But I do like what I heard Greg say, if I understood the way Dalen promoted that or asked that question, which was trying to make the KPIs and the measures more meaningful to people by like how you're conveying and communicating that. If that's what you were saying, I think more of that is good, absolutely, in addition to what Colin said.
Moving on to the next one. On slide 18, could you mention or perhaps give some examples of which of the key results are leading versus lagging? You said you understand that there's not a perfect key result and that a leading today could be a lagging tomorrow, but we're curious how you see it in your example.
So are you saying when I reference these as leading indicators?
Correct.
So what's the distinction versus leading, lagging? Is that the question?
Yeah, just the examples specifically, yeah.
Yeah, so the example here is basically we're saying on this epic, our belief is that if we were to implement this referral program, that we would get 250 new customers. That's our leading indicator. Now we do the work necessary to launch the referral program, and then we can evaluate how many new customers did we actually get. So it's a great leading indicator because the new customer acquisition is going to start happening immediately upon making this, hopefully it will, upon making this capability available in the marketplace. So that's the example that moves through here. And then we can evaluate if we hypothesize 250, but we're saying we actually only got 25. I think we should stop the referral program because it's not working, particularly when you look at, in this example, the difference between what we achieved with the 3-month bundle with Apple Music. We hypothesized 750, and we actually got 900. We want to continue with this work. I hope.
Thank you, Larry. We've got a couple of minutes, so we'll try to get some more questions in. I think this one will be a short one. Can the OKR practice be added to a LaSalle charter rather than creating an entire separate entity in a scaled governance structure? I think the short answer is yes, if you have one.
I recommend it, yes. I recommend it, absolutely, yes, positively. They're perfectly well suited.
Yeah, you know, we've talked about combining OKRs and Agile. And so absolutely, if we can embed that OKRs practice within the LaSalle and make that more visible and show how it all ties together, absolutely, that's a good plan.
All right, here's a nice one. Our organization has been adopting SAFe for the past 3 or 4 years, and our PI planning events continue to evolve, and we are attempting to make the next step into use of OKRs for guidance and measurement. A big sticking point seems to be how to measure the business value delivered. Ultimately, how to put a measurement on business value. What are some practices that you can recommend to help do that?
So one of the, actually several of the clients that I've worked with have had this exact same problem. And what we ultimately ended up with is that we don't do business value calculation during PI planning. Essentially, the OKRs, the quarterly OKRs become the PI objectives. And so you just simply don't have to do that other stuff because it's moot at that point. When your KRs are driving the work, driving the feature sets, then it's very simple. You just have your PI objectives become your quarterly OKRs.
Yeah, and I'll just add real quick to that one is the unit of measure that you use in your key results is really important in terms of how you'll even begin to think about business value, right? What is the measure you're trying to affect? When you do that within the context of the OKR, the business value discussion will start to happen naturally because it's a needed, input to a good OKR. So if you're struggling to identify how to measure the business value coming out of your PI, don't look at the work the teams are doing and look at the work and try to find the value in the work the teams are doing. Find the value in the OKRs that we're delivering. Identify the value there, and then the result of the work we did informs the key result. So you have to bring the how we're measuring business value up a level. Now, here's the thing. You can do that with active in-flight work. You just have to do a little profiling of the work to start to, kind of tie it back to the OKRs, meaning, you have to make sure that there's synergies there in order to have that feedback loop work.
We are just about at time, but I think I'll save the best question for last. This is one that I run into. My executives are always busy. I'm convinced they should leverage OKRs. How do I get them on board?
Yeah, so,
how do you bridge that gap? I'd say, saying that you're going to align things isn't that sexy. But if you go to executives and say, I'm going to increase predictability and perform some risk reduction inside your organization, then I think their ears perk up.
Yeah, and I think just simplifying the question to them. The question is, can you help us define some measurable key results for our strategy? Have the conversation there. Don't ask about Agile or tell them you're trying to fix anything. Just say, can we get some measurable outcomes to complement our strategy? That usually can get to a more decent conversation, particularly when we're talking about, something that's going to move the business forward.
And we are at time with 1 minute over. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
So if you have any more questions, please give us a call. Go to our website. Come to the Agile Coach class, and you can hear how this stuff actually gets put into practice. As we said before, everybody will be getting a recording of this presentation. So we look forward to furthering the conversation with you and your organization. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks for attending. Bye.